Hello, folks, and welcome to the One to Deploy podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Martin, and in episode 2 today, we are discussing tokens versus shares, why the future of company value is on-chain. Now, this topic might sound a little bit overdone or perhaps trendy. Maybe it's something that people are talking about because they're all crypto bros. But the angle that I'm coming from is one more of commercial value, or how shares are simply going to change, perhaps even removing the need for share markets entirely. The concept is centered around this. What if owning part of a business didn't mean going through brokers or buying stock on a stock exchange, but instead holding a token on one of the various chains, for example, Ethereum, Sui, or Solana? What if you could own part of a business, retaining the value of that business by owning its token living on one of the chains, rather than having to go through a stock exchange to own that share? Now, obviously, there is the corporate governance issue and the various corporate management structures that are required in countries around the world. That will, in my opinion, change, and it will change to meet the needs of things like this. But the core thesis of this theory is this: tokens are becoming the new shares, only they are faster, more transparent, and that's the key part, and of course native to the internet. The theory is this: shares are where you own part of a business and that share price moves in value, and that is fundamentally where you make your money, moving aside the dividend piece for a moment. Those shares are traded on an exchange. The company, to illustrate the value of those shares, has to report every quarter, half, or even year its annual statements. And it does things that will change the share price. It will maybe do ad campaigns, or it will have some PR campaign, or let's face it, the value of a share will in fact change based on consumer sentiment. When it comes to tokens, it works very differently. If you have a business that is truly tokenized, a business or an online platform, I mean, in this context, it's more or less the same thing. If it has a token at the core of the business operation, then that token is publicly visible on one of a number of different platforms, principally the chain itself. And that chain would be Ethereum, Solana, Sui, and there are others out there as well, perhaps smaller ones. Those chains show as a public ledger the value of the token, but it also shows the transactions of that token. And you can access that data any place, any time, without restriction. It's publicly available information. That's the whole point of blockchain. So by owning that token, you are owning a part of the business, and you also get to see the success of that business on-chain in real time. Now, I'm going to delve a bit more into how that works later on, but first up, let's talk about how the traditional model works. So how traditional shares work in what we would call here, for the context of this conversation at least, the old model. So simply it works this way. You start yourself a company, and then you will issue out shares in that company either on private terms. So you might have 5 people that you know that have given you some money, and you basically create a contract. You will register that company in whatever country you're in, using whatever corporate rules are required for that, and then you'll issue people shares. Maybe they get 10, maybe they get 10%, maybe it's in hundreds or thousands, or whatever metric you choose to use. You issue out shares to those 5 people. Now, you can also then, if you choose to, float the company on various public exchanges, generally only one at a time, unless you have divisions of a company, and then you can perhaps do it around the world. So you will float that company. And what float means is you simply say, here are all our shares. They are now on that stock exchange. You can buy or sell them whenever you want to, except, of course, when we are in a trading halt, or perhaps when we say we want to pause them for some reason, or perhaps the exchange is closed, which is, let's face it, at least half the time because they don't work at nighttime. So you can put your company on those exchanges and people can buy and sell those shares. Now, here's where it gets very, very bloated, if you will. This requires brokers, Sure, they might be online like Self-Wealth or Robinhood, but it also requires clearing houses which plug in behind things like Robinhood and Self-Wealth, and they sit then in front of the stock exchanges themselves. And of course, you've then got the market hours, so the periods that the market is live for, and then disclosures. And disclosures are the key part that we'll get to later on. Disclosures around actions that the company is taking, and also things like public accounts. You will typically, when a company is floated on a stock exchange or even privately, typically only get quarterly updates or account reports, that kind of thing. And even then, the fact of the matter is, and this happens all the time, think of Enron, data can be manipulated. So the reality is, in the old model, shares are fundamentally opaque. They're not really transparent. They're delayed, and here is another key part, they're centralized. So the control of the asset that you own is completely centralized through this one platform, which would be the stock exchange that it's listed on. Take, for example, the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, or the Australian Stock Exchange. That's the old method. Now, let's enter the token, the new model, the new way of doing things. So, this requires a little bit of technical explanation for those of you that aren't familiar with how a token works. I'll try and keep it light because if you already know how a token works, you don't care about hearing this. If you don't know how a token works, then giving you all the detail is not going to help. A token basically is a piece of a digital machine. You will have heard of the term blockchain. A blockchain is more or less a really, really big, complicated mathematical equation with numbers and data in it that is encrypted, and it is so difficult to unencrypt it that it cannot be replicated in a reasonable amount of time such that it becomes irrefutable, meaning it cannot be copied. So any blockchain worth its salt, it is strong enough to stand on its own, and no computing power in the world could possibly hack it in a fast enough time for it to be copied. Thus meaning a token or a blockchain is this pretty strong, almost, contractual, if you will, mechanism of computing power that allows you to store information and have it in this decentralized fashion. And what decentralized means is, and this is the case that I'll get to in a sec, it's on-chain. So decentralized means there is no one single place where that blockchain lives. It lives, and if you take Ethereum as the example, it lives in what's called the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine. There are copies of this blockchain absolutely everywhere, and everyone that interacts with the blockchain will at least have part of that blockchain in their interaction. So what you end up with is this entire network of copies of the blockchain or parts of the blockchain that mean that it is truly decentralized. No one person can control it. A token is a item or a derivation, if you will, of the chain. So if we have Ethereum as the base chain, you can have a token that you create yourself that sits on Ethereum, and it's basically, you can name it whatever you like, but it uses the Ethereum operating system, for want of a better term, and you can then allocate as many tokens as you want. You can operate them however you want. It's completely under your control, save for the fact that it doesn't require permissions. Now, you might say, well, if it doesn't require permission, doesn't that mean everyone can do everything? And the answer is yes, unless you set it up correctly in the first place. And this is where things like blockchain audits and whatnot come into play, because a properly set up token, one that, for example, would be used as shares in a business, will be set up in such a way that it can't be edited once it's published. And this is where the real value comes in as a shareholder, or in your case, a token holder, because it can't be edited once the thing is live. But more than that, a token is liquid and tradable 24/7. This is the thing that you really want to take home. It's liquid and tradable 24/7. So once a token is published onto an exchange, and there are many of them around, it is tradable immediately. But more importantly, and this is the key part that I think separates shares from tokens and is really where things are going to move into the future, it tracks usage. So where a business or a platform is truly tokenized, every transaction that that business undertakes or that platform undertakes equals a signal of value. Every query, every report, every purchase of access to that platform, it's all visible. Ultimately, what that means is the more throughput that a business has, the more usage that it has, the more reports that are run, the more purchases that are made, all that stuff is visible on the blockchain. That isn't the case when it comes to shares. So for tokens to be so publicly visible, it allows you to see how well a business is doing at any point in time, and it can't be faked. An example here, and I can use my own platforms as an example of this, Know Your Market, which is the AI platform that people can use to generate insights from various marketing sources, and the KYMAi token. They are two separate entities, but they are interlinked. In our case, every time someone uses the platform, so uses Kim, the platform, to do something like a query, a report, or purchase a query pack, it ends up on the Ethereum ledger. So the public ledger that I spoke about earlier, because KYMAi is a token, the transaction will be visible on the Ethereum ledger. So if you're a token holder, or I might say shareholder, if you are one of those people, you will be able to see how the business is operating simply by looking at the volume of KYMAi transactions that are happening on chain. But this isn't just revenue reporting. This is the key difference, right? When you think about shares, it tends to be, business reports and accounting tends to be about revenue, profit and loss, stuff like that. It's all numbers and dollars and cents. This isn't just revenue reporting. It's live, trustless business telemetry, right? Sounds a bit funky that, but what that really means is, and the trustless part is key here, it's live, so it's happening all the time, but it's business telemetry, so showing you the volumes of usage of that business or platform at any point in time without you needing to trust an intermediary. So you're not having to go to an auditor to get the accounts audited to see whether this is real or not. You can look at it and know, because of the way blockchain works, it's all on chain, it's permissionless, it's liquid, it's tradable 24/7. This is trustless business telemetry. That's how the new model works. Now, the key part of all this equation is real-time, unfakeable company performance. So I know I've kind of glossed over this a few times now. It's the point I'd like you to take away from this whole podcast. Contrast is this. If we think about traditional businesses, be they private or public, so public being listed on the stock exchange, the way that you would look at success of that business is the reporting of results. So that could be as simple as looking at a bank statement, or it could be something like a financial report that is generated every quarter, every half year, or every year, and then that is released. Now, as you know, financial reports, if you've ever looked at one, firstly, they're enormous. Secondly, they are only trustable if they have been audited by an external auditor. But the fact of the matter is the external auditor is paid by the company in question, which means, can you trust it? Now, that's a little bit cynical. However, the fact of the matter is these things have been shown to be fake before. Those reports only come from the company. So they're only reporting results that they want you to see. If we flip this around entirely and talk about a tokenized business emits results. Now, emits results, I've used that term very specifically. Emit is actually a technical term from the Ethereum blockchain. Every time an event occurs within a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain, you are supposed to have it configured in such a way, and I say supposed to because sometimes people don't, you have it configured in such a way that it emits an event to the blockchain. That emission is the publicly viewable thing that you as the shareholder/token holder can look at and see, oh, look, a thing actually happened. You can also look at the source code that created that emission too, should you be able to read the code, and it's not terribly complicated, this stuff, at least at the code level. You can look at that and say, that emission meant this, Therefore, oh yes, this is actually working, or actually no, what that meant was this, and that's not as interesting as I thought it was. The point is, it's all public and you can read it. You look at those emissions, or when it emits a result, and that tokenized business is telling you this thing happened. The blockchain is ultimately, in this context, an unforgeable audit trail. Much like those external auditors that I spoke about before should be the ones that are the unforgeable audit trail. In the context of a tokenized business, the blockchain is the unforgeable audit trail. Token volume, so the transactions that move, becomes a real-time proxy for value creation. I'll say that again slowly. Token volume becomes the real-time proxy for value creation. So rather than a share price moving based off consumer sentiment or some Sydney Sweeney ad or whatever it might be, the token volume actually tells you whether there is value in this token or not. And the higher the volumes, the higher the price of the token, because that's how these things work, which tells you there is value being created behind that token, which ultimately is the business itself. If the token demand rises, that means company usage is growing, therefore the value in that company is rising as well. It is straight up mathematical, and as I come back to again, it is real-time, unfakeable company performance. Tokenized businesses will ultimately replace traditional shareholding. I promise you this is where we're headed. Now, that's great. We've got unfakeable company performance. What is interesting to the shareholder or the token holder is, how do I get my money out? So, liquidity and accessibility. This is obviously the most interesting part. Yeah, okay, performance is wonderful if you're holding, but if you want to sell out, how do you get your money? Well, let's face it. Shares, they're hard to access, particularly if you're talking about an early stage startups. They're hard to access and they can only be traded either through specific brokers or at specific times. Trading outside of market hours is very difficult and you have to be basically a large institution. By contrast, with tokens, you can hold, trade and sell from your phone or from your computer or from basically any digital device that you like. There are even small ledger wallets that will allow you to trade from these tiny little devices. These tokens, albeit equivalent in the context of this conversation to company shares, they are very, very liquid because you can sell them at any time. Now, there is part of this equation that requires much more discussion, and I won't go into it right now, but this is called liquidity pools. The way that token trading works is you're not always trading against someone else that has the token that you want to buy. So you're not trading with another human. You are often trading into a liquidity pool. Because you're trading into that liquidity pool, you can access it anytime you like. Ultimately, what this does is it democratizes access to the business upside. So you can very easily get access to the upside, being the growth of a business, simply by accessing its token versus trying to buy and sell shares. And the really sexy part, in my opinion, is early users of a token become the early shareholders. But there's no big brokerage account, no big upfront fees. If you're an early user of a platform that is using tokens, you will generally be given the tokens as well as part of that usage. You become a shareholder from the very get-go. But people say, well, a token doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. I disagree. What you're really buying with a token, you're not buying some coin. What you're doing is you're buying things like, depending on the structure, things like access to a platform. You are buying the upside that comes with that. You are buying the signal being the success of that business, and you're buying yourself tradability. Tokens represent not just the utility of the platform, but also ownership in the momentum of the business. Much like shares are supposed to, but it's so slow by comparison and can be faked, tokens represent ownership in the positive, or in some cases negative, momentum of a business. So what's my big idea here? Well, I think you've probably got the point already, but the big idea is this. It is a new way to value businesses. a new way to value businesses that's different from the traditional shareholding method. Imagine a world where valuation isn't just a number on a pitch deck. It's not just something that someone has written down. It is observable, I'll get it out eventually, observable, provable, and it is market driven, right? So you can see it, you can prove it, and it will change based off market need. Now, the market isn't necessarily the share market, it is the customer market for the business that you bought the token for. The share market will become redundant, particularly for internet native businesses, but one might argue for larger businesses or perhaps older businesses that are more mature, they will probably choose not to go with the share market and quite literally tokenize their business, because it's possible to do that. This is ultimately the next evolution of capitalism. It's all on chain. People have said when Bitcoin first came along, what's this thing? It's worth nothing. And at the time it was worth, less than 0.001 of a cent, like it was some ridiculously small value. Last I checked, it was $117,000 per Bitcoin. You can't tell me people don't see value in this stuff. Ultimately, the token will change the way that business shares operate. And I know at the moment it looks a bit airy-fairy, and yet Bitcoin's worth a whole lot because it's seen as an equivalent to gold. It is, granted. But this concept of seeing businesses succeed or not succeed by looking at their token value is already happening. It's just not mainstream. The example to where the shift is already happening, if you take a look at what we're doing right now. With Know Your Market and KYMAi token, this is the example. So when people are using Know Your Market, every single query, every single report, every single transaction is based on the KYMAi token. And an event is emitted every single time something occurs. That event becomes your measure of success for what you have purchased into ultimately with your token. There will be more of this happening. It already happens a lot at the moment in the Web3 space. So the highly, highly technical businesses or technical platforms are doing this such that you can see value in those businesses on decentralized or centralized exchanges. But it will come into more mainstream businesses, like what I would call Know Your Market is, more mainstream typical businesses that average everyday users are getting into. The token element will become part of how people can access those businesses. The token model will also then rewrite how we build value and fund companies. And I know this may put a lot of people that are very old school corporation types back on their heels a touch, but it will rewrite how we build companies, how we then value them, and that's key, and then how you fund them. You need to start paying attention to the businesses that are building with tokens at their core, and that part is key. The token needs to be at the core of the business, be it an online business or not, because that is where the future is already leaking out. That is where the future is already happening. And if I can leave you with one thing, because this is the One to Deploy podcast, and I need you to have one thing that you can walk away with. Look up DEX tools. That is D for David, E for Echo, X for X-ray. Tools, TOOLS. Look up DEX tools online. There are a number of them. Pick one of those and have a look. Then start looking at, because you'll see a list of tokens show up when you look at one of those platforms, start having a look at the token volume movements of any one of those tokens. And then watch what happens over time. You will see, particularly if you've chosen a token that is attached to a business, you will see when that business succeeds, token value goes up, and when it doesn't, it goes down. It becomes that proxy for business activity. So jump on, have a look, and educate yourself there. Well, I hope you've got the point out of today's podcast. The point being, tokenized businesses are ultimately the future of share markets. I'm Daniel Martin. This has been One to Deploy, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.